Today we examine some burnt offerings. Welcome to Rotted, review of the day, and this day we're going to be taking a spoiler-free look at the 1976 Dan Curtis classic, Burnt Offerings. We will be having another video posted today, which is a deep dive spoiler-filled discussion, but if you haven't seen the movie, you don't want anything ruined for you, this is the video to watch. So why don't we go ahead and just dive right into it. Let me just go ahead and first start by saying that even though this is a classic, I had not seen it until today, which I actually kind of find a little bit surprising. I have a huge soft spot in my heart for classic horror, especially classic haunted house horror. One of my absolute favorites is the 1960s version of The Haunting, the 1970s version of The Legend of Hell House. Um, I even have a really big soft spot in my heart for House on Haunted Hill, the original and the remake, honestly. But the original, too, is as cheesy as it can be. But I had not seen this one. And the reason that I picked it out, I'm not ashamed to say that it's because I saw the name Burgess Meredith attached to it. Love Burgess Meredith. He's in some of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes. Um, Classic actor, in Rocky and the Batman series and so forth. So I just I picked it for that reason alone. And unfortunately, he was only in the first half of the first act. But regardless, I thought he did a fairly admirable job. Why don't we go ahead and just dive right into the review and look at the 5 categories. Each category is worth up to 20 points, and we're going to have a total possible score on every movie of up to 100 points to judge everything. And you might ask whether or not I judge a classic under the same vein as I do everything else. Yes, absolutely. I see no reason why it shouldn't hold up just as well as a modern horror film. The only area that I might grant it some allowances is in the world of effects. And that is something I'm going to be taking the timeline into account with. But when you do pit it against movies that have the same potential fear induced horror element as The Haunting, The Exorcist, just some of the great classics, there's no excuse for it not to be scary if that's what it's trying to do. So yes, I will be holding it with the same guiding hand, the same rule book, and the same scoring as everything else. So the plot of this starts out fairly familiarly with another movie in the late 70s, mid late 70s. A family wants to take care of a large, grand establishment for a season while they get on their feet, and the father figure is attempting to battle his demons while revamping his career, and the place starts to take over a life of its own, altering the family members' behaviors. Obviously, putting it side by side with The Shining, but this had a very, very different feel to it than The Shining. And instead of a isolated Colorado hotel in the wintertime, this is a grand, it looks to be some southern villa in the summertime. And the differences don't end there. The tone is remarkably different. It felt to me older than the 1976. It had a more old timey feel to it, and that could be just because of Oliver Reed, who has a very classic feel to him. It also has Karen Black and Betty Davis. She's also in it, so there's some really strong classic actors in it, as opposed to up and coming fresh faces that just got their start with this film. Whether or not the plot worked, just getting right into it, I thought it did. I gave it 13 points out of possible 20. The plot worked on its face value. I just thought that it left too much unanswered. When a horror movie kind of gets going, it is a mystery and oftentimes a supernatural mystery. So it has to establish its own set of rules for the audience. And I can get into this with the deep dive discussion, but it felt to me like it didn't follow its own rules that it established, that it was kind of shifting itself to create a sense of suspense where that may just come across as a little bit lazy writing, or possibly just lazy storytelling on the part of the director, screenwriter, who knows. But for me, it wasn't consistent. And with those inconsistencies, I think it could have been explained if they had given that some time to do so. But they didn't. So, strong plot, didn't really hold up against itself by the end. The next category, intent. This intended to be just a out and out scary haunted house, family turning against each other kind of movie, and in that regard, I did like it. I thought it held its own very well. The way that the characters were portrayed and the way that they changed over time, I thought was very effective, and that was on in large part to the acting. But I think that what it was going for, it set out and accomplished. So 15 out of 20 for that. The acting, I had to pull back just a little bit. The performances were strong, but they were also very stiff and a little bit wooden. And I think that's also kind of what gave it its classic feel. There was a lot of very kind of uptight New England accent kind of dialogue to it, which it worked, but it didn't really sell the characters to me. And that may be an issue with the writing. That may be, the actors could only work with what they were given. And it wasn't bad. I'm not going to give it a 5 out of 20, but I just can't in good conscience give it a whole lot more than 13. There were some overacting moments that I just kind of cringed with. There were some moments in there that required a certain level of subtlety in the emotion regarding the situation that was going on, and subtlety was not its strong game. So 13 out of 20. Respectable acting, but didn't blow me out of the water. The effects, 15 out of 20 on this one. There weren't a whole lot of effects to be had, but there was a scene, without giving anything away, that involved a swimming pool that I thought was pretty impressive, how they could have pulled that off in the 1970s. So I have to give it to them on that one. There's a scene towards the end that actually did deal with some blood and gore that had me smiling from ear to ear, which the lover of me with practical effects had to give that one some kudos. I have seen special effects done better, but even so, what was there was good. So 15 out of 20 for that. The fear quotient is where this really kind of fell down for me. I gave it a 10 out of 20. It just wasn't that scary. There was a lot that I could kind of see coming a mile off. Maybe that had something to do with it. Maybe it was the overacting in some areas. Maybe that had something to do with it. When something pulls you out and reminds you, hey, you're watching a movie, it's difficult to be emotionally invested enough to be scared. Even so, it had some definite creep factors to it. It had some suspense moments to it. There were some elements that kept you on edge and kept you wondering what was going to be happening to the characters, what was behind that door that whole time. So, it's not going to get any lower than a 10, but the fact that I didn't jump, I wasn't biting my nails, there was no part of me with any kind of goosebumps, I just can't give it any higher than that. And to be perfectly honest, maybe I am giving that a little bit of a classic, movie bump. But I'm gonna stand by it. I'm gonna stand by 10 out of 20 for that. So that's gonna bring the total up to 66 points. So on the whole, fairly decent movie. I'm going to go ahead and say that if you love classic horror films, I do recommend it. I think that this is one worth watching. I just don't think it's a must watch. If you don't have this tucked under your belt as something that you can show off, hey, yes, I watched Burnt Offerings. You're not really losing out on a whole lot. But if you have some time, you have the movie, you want to kick it off and enjoy a good classic horror film, I think you could do a whole lot worse, and that's a fact. Like I said, we're going to be having a deep dive discussion video coming up after this. And in the meantime, next time you want to watch a horror film, first make sure that it's good and rotted.